Hey, good morning. Morning, John.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Jim. Is that you? Peter.
Yeah, this is Peter.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm
Good
good.
morning,
Good.
Director Aguilar and Director Nelson. This is Sylvia. I just want to do a quick mic check. Make sure you can hear us and we can
Yep.
hear you.
I can hear you well.
Perfect. Thank you.
I can hear you as well.
Great. Thank you. I think we're just waiting. We have about a minute left here, and then Director Estrada should also be joining us online. So we're just giving him a minute.
Thank you. Yeah.
What did they say? What did they say, Larry?
Nothing.
You're in the meeting now?
Uh-huh.
Are you showing everything?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Director Aguilar and Director Nelson are now all joining us, and we do have some consultants and a member of the public as well online. And we are good.
So green light ready to go.
Green light, ready to go.
Good. That's a stop. I'm looking at a hand back there. Yes, okay, now we're good. You thought you had the final word, didn't you? But you didn't. No, you didn't. Okay, well, good morning. We'll officially call to order the regular meeting of the Coachella Valley Water District Board of Directors here in beautiful Palm Desert. It's beautiful for like one more day and then it's going to get hot. April 27th, 2021. And would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. I'd like to make clear for the record that this meeting is being conducted by teleconference pursuant to the Brown Act waivers provided for under Governor's executive orders in response to the COVID-19 state of emergency. The agenda states that the public may view this meeting online as there will be no public location for attending in person. This meeting is being live streamed online at the district's website. As stated on the agenda, members of the public who wish to comment on any item within the jurisdiction of the district or any item on the agenda were given the opportunity to submit comments by emailing the district. Such comments will become part of the board meeting record. Did we have anything that qualifies for that?
Good morning, President Powell. We do not have any general public comments. We do have a letter that was submitted, and we have a member of the public that will be speaking on one of the public hearing items.
Awesome, thank you. All right. And then we do have people attending online, so I'll make sure that we call on folks directly. We'll do roll call votes so that we don't miss any opportunities for input by anybody. Good. So roll call, please.
Good morning, President Powell.
Here.
Vice President Estrada.
Here.
Thank you. Director Bianco.
Here.
Director Aguilar.
Here?
And Director Nelson.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, well, good morning to our virtual board members. Yeah. Do we have any additions, deletions, or adjustments to our agenda today? Hearing none. We've already covered public comment. And this brings us to consent calendar, which consists of items 6A through F. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. President, I'd like to accept the approval of the consent calendar. Make a motion.
All right, so we have a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second.
We have a second from Director Nelson. I just want to give everyone an opportunity to weigh in if they wanted to pull something. But I don't hear that. So roll call, please.
Yes, President Powell.
Aye.
Vice President Estrada.
Aye.
Director Bianco.
Aye.
Director Aguilar.
Yes?
And Director Nelson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that passed 5-0. Well done. Item 8, presentations and recognitions. We have 5 anniversaries for March. We have a couple more, 2 more for April, and a retirement. Also, Raul Limon, 15 years. Didn't have any write-ups, so I think we can recognize.
Correct.
Did someone want to read these off? I mean, they're all listed here in the online. I think that's good, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I read the retirement. Congratulations to everybody. Made it that far. Okay. So we're into the public hearings now. At this time, staff will provide a presentation on the adoption of canal service rates and charges for fiscal years 2022 to 2026 and approval of ordinance number 1434.1. Following the presentation, we will open the public hearing, and making the presentation this morning is Jeffrey Keel, Director of Finance. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, President Powell, members of the board. I have no new territory to cover, so this is all for the public. Whoa, that's not my item. Where's my PowerPoint? So I'm just start with some introductory comments for the public. So over a year ago, we contracted Carollo Engineering to conduct a 5-year cost of service study that would be covering our canal replenishment funds and domestic waters lines of business. That project began last March, so over a year we've been working on this, collecting revenue and expense information, customer data, future operations, analysis, capital needs, et cetera, for completing this 5-year study. At the first overview projection back in October, the board gave us some very clear direction in these unprecedented times. Board's direction was to reduce expenses and capital as much as possible in order to keep the rate impacts to as minimal as possible for the board, for the ratepayers. So that was the key priority is maintain affordability of canal water. There was a lot behind that statement. but we're also intent on following the rules of Prop 218, that we had to do the analysis that would allow us to recover costs in a fair and equitable manner. That's why this is a very involved study that's been going on, and we had a lot of detail behind it. We had several study sessions for the board. As I said, November 17th was the first one, and February 2nd and February 23rd. And the mailing of the Prop 218 notices was done on, approved on February 23rd. The financial plan that we ended up coming up with at board's direction included 2.6% increases in the irrigation water consumptive charge and the water supply surcharge beginning in fiscal year 23 for each of the next 4 years. And also we had a cost recovery needed to do on both the Quagga and the gate charges and the OSID 1 charges to bring them up to what it was costing us. And per board direction, we spread that over a 3-year period, starting with this next fiscal year. So with that, I think that's enough background. I do believe we have Alex Bugby from Carollo, who's conducted the study, is on the line, answer any questions. Also, our Prop 218 expert from BB&K, Lutfi Karoof, is also on the line to answer any legal questions from the board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
And here's the rate schedule for the public.
yeah, and I guess now it might be a good time before we go into the public portion of this, if there's any desire by board members to question, or is there any input from any board members at this time before we get into the actual public hearing? I don't hear any.
I don't either.
I know we've been over this a few times. Okay, so this is a time and place fixed for the public hearing on the proposed rate increase for canal water for fiscal years 2022 through 2026, which is being held in accordance with the procedural provisions of Proposition 218. Clerk Bermudez, have we completed proper notification of this public hearing?
Yes, Mr. President, notice of the public hearing and the proposed rate increase was given by direct mail to property owners and tenants of real property who may be directly liable to pay the charges for canal water, and by legal publication in the Desert Sun. As proof of proper notice of this hearing, I present the United States Postal Service Consolidated Postage Statement, Standard Mail, proof of publication, and proof of publication from the Desert Sun and the affidavit of posting.
Sounds so old-fashioned.
I know, right?
How many ponies did it take to deliver all that mail? I mean, it just, okay. So, thank you. I will defer to legal counsel regarding the purpose of today's public hearing.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The requirements of Proposition 218 are being followed. The date and time of this public hearing is not less than 45 days after the mailing of the notice. The purpose of the hearing is to hear oral testimony and to consider written protests concerning the proposed ordinance, which would authorize the adjustments to the rates. Customer or property owners is not required to provide oral testimony in order to submit a written protest. A written protest must specify that it is being submitted in protest, include the customer or property owner's name, parcel number or service address, and the signature. If written protests against the proposed rates are presented by a majority of the owners of the identified parcels upon which the rates are to be imposed, the board may not impose the adjustments to the rates. If written protests against the proposed rates are not presented by a majority of owners of the identified parcels, the board may impose the adjustments to the rates if it decides to adopt the proposed ordinance. As explained in this Prop 218 notice, the publications, and the agenda for this meeting, individuals wishing to address the board were given the opportunity to provide written comments in advance of the meeting via mail and or email, and individuals may provide public comment during this meeting via telephone or the online meeting platform. Any protests that are submitted via email must include an image of the person's signature, and the protest must be received by the district prior to the close of the hearing. I just want to make it clear, because of our current state of the COVID pandemic and lockdown, adjustments were made to provide for email protests to be submitted in advance and prior to the end of this public hearing.
Thank you, Jeff. So I hereby declare the public hearing open and will request that those wishing to speak, please give your name and property location and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Do we have anyone wishing to speak?
Mr. President, I do have somebody on the line, Mr. Larry Strasbow. If I mispronounce it, I do apologize, Larry. He's on the line, and if you can please unmute yourself, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Board of Directors.
Morning.
I'm Mark Strasbaugh, from property near Mecca, farming and ranching and recreational. It defines our uses down there. We happen to have installed 3 meters back in 2011 at the urging of the CD Water. But the motivations being they wanted to reduce the groundwater draw in the area, and a couple of large farms were the big users. So they decided to run a lateral from the canal 3 miles down to serve these additional acreages to reduce pumping. In order to do this, the original farm treaties required 660 acres minimal land to allow the expanded laterals to be installed. So they needed my property to total the minimal acreage in order to be allowed to bring in the lateral. They asked me to participate, and I said yes, and I agreed to. And at the end of the day, they charged me several $100,000 for my share, which I'm still paying on through taxes, property tax assessments. I have no dispute or fight with the situation with water as it stands now, in that the limited resource. I don't have any real dispute with adjusting the rates from time to time. That's a necessary situation that comes up. However, my problem is that when they did the Hoxie study that resulted in Prop 218, they decided as one of the items of changes was to change classifications 1 and 2 as to certain users, resulted in moving our use out of ag use, which is Class 1, into Class 2. We had been in Class 1 ag use for over 20 years, and we do practice ag in limited areas. We grow date trees, we raise seed for wildlife, and we do actually propagate mesquite trees. But we don't have any technical commercial ag practices at this time. So to make a long story short, I just wanted to get the board aware that we feel that we should not be classified as Class 2. We were not classified in that class for 20 years. We're not a golf course, and we're not a polo field. We're valuable users of the land. We use very little water for our purposes of duck ponds. And the water space rates of this water cost is not only damaging our use, but it's threatening the actual wetland uses of the whole area around Mecca. There's been a huge decline in the amount of valuable wetland habitat in the Mecca area in the last few years. So I just wanted to express my concerns to the board and make you aware of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Strasbaugh.
Thank you.
And we also have a letter that you sent in. have somebody else? I saw some papers. Nope. Nothing
No,
else?
I just, is there anyone else on the line? I believe the rest are consultants that I have on the line. Are there any additional public speakers for this hearing on the canal rates? Okay, it appears we do not.
Thank you. So I'm prepared to close the public hearing. However, before I do that, I would like to provide anyone who would like to submit or withdraw a written protest the opportunity to do so. Once the public hearing is closed, state law prohibits us from accepting any further written protests. Are there any remaining written protests to be delivered to the clerk? No.
And I'm just double checking my emails. I have not received any up until this point, any additional requests.
Okay, thank you. So there are none at this time. I hereby declare the public hearing closed. We will now have the written protests tabulated. What is that tabulation?
Let's see. Mr. President, there were 845 parcels identified that could be affected by the proposed canal rate increase. In this instance, a majority protest would exist if the district received 423 written protests prior to the close of this public hearing. Prior to the close of this public hearing, the district has received 61 written protests from qualifying owners and tenants of the identified parcels. A majority protest does not exist.
And therefore, the board may proceed to consider the adoption of the ordinance.
I left that up to you.
Right. Thank you. So do we have any questions or comments by members of the board?
I'm sorry, but there is one minor typographical correction if the board wishes to adopt the ordinance.
Yes, President Powell, members of the board, I apologize. During the public testimony, Scott Burrett came up to me and pointed out that we had made a change that polo fields should not be identified under Class 2. It's at the top paragraph of page 2 of the ordinance. So recommend we remove the word polo fields so they are appropriately Class 1.
And that's simply part of the recitals to describe Class 1 and Class 2. And the Prop 218 notice was indeed accurate on that matter. So
Yes, that's correct.
It's a typographical change to a recital. So if the board wishes to approve it, they can be approved as amended or as revised.
All right, so striking the word polo fields from that sentence.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, good catch. Is that consistent with our past?
It is. It is
Practice.
consistent with a change that the board adopted late last year, I think.
I think that might have been a meeting I did not.
You know, we did have a couple of board members involved, and I do believe we brought it back to the full board for the change consideration and approval.
Yeah, it might have been that litigation that I was recused from. That's why I don't know.
That's right.
Okay. All right, thank you for the correction to the ordinance. So those two words are stricken from that top of the second page. Do we have any questions by members of the board at this time? Just going to do a quick mic check. Director Nelson?
Yeah, John, I don't have anything else to add.
Thank you. Director Aguilar?
Neither do I, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you. And Vice President Estrada?
No, no comments, questions, in agreement with revisions to removals to words.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, the board is asked to, and I figured if you had something to say, you would have said, waved your hands.
You know me.
At this time, the board is asked to consider the adoption for ordinance 1434.1, authorizing increases in the rates for canal water service charges. Is that the end of the script? Somebody needs to make a motion.
Correct.
Mr. President, this is Director Aguilar. I will move approval of the canal service rates and charges for fiscal years 22 through 26, and approval of ordinance number 1434.1 as amended.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Estrada. Thank you. This time we will have a roll call vote.
President Powell,
Aye.
Vice President Estrada,
Aye.
Director Bianco,
Aye.
Director Aguilar,
Yes.
and Director Nelson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, so that ordinance is adopted and passed 5-0. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And then we have, it looks like, let's see here, another public hearing, onto 9B. And let me just work through this now. On agenda item 9B, this item is a public hearing to determine if the Board of Directors wishes to adopt a resolution of necessity authorizing CVWD to commence an eminent domain proceeding for acquisition of an easement interest within certain real property located in the county of Riverside, California, and identified as APN 727100006 in Riverside County for the St. Anthony Mobile Home Park Water Consolidation Project. And District Council will explain the nature and scope of this hearing.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The purpose of this public hearing is for the board to consider and to decide each of the following issues. Number one, that the public interest and necessity require the proposed project. Number two, the proposed project is planned or located in the manner that will be most compatible with the greatest public good and least private injury. 3, the real property described in Exhibit A is necessary for the proposed project, and an offer to purchase the property was made pursuant to Section 7267.2 of the Government Code. And 4, the amount of compensation to be paid for the subject property is not an issue to be decided, and the adoption of this resolution of necessity will not preclude CVWD from continuing to negotiate with the property owner. If the board does have any questions about the nature and scope of the hearing, I can certainly answer those. Otherwise, I would refer to Ms. Oliphant to go over and explain how those criteria have indeed been met.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I don't hear any word. So I will now call on the clerk of the board to provide proof of the mailing of the notice of hearing on the resolution of necessity.
Yes, Mr. President, on April 2nd, 2021, a notice of this hearing was sent to the record owners of the property via regular U.S. mail. U.S. mail certified receipt requested in personal service. Attached to the staff report, I'm not actually sure if that's correct, but I do have a copy of the notice of the hearing to property owners that were mailed to the owners and interested parties as indicated.
Thank you. Were there any written objections or requests to be heard in response to these notices?
Mr. President, no written objections or requests to be heard have been received by CVWD.
Okay. Was there an email received?
Wow, yes.
I'm sorry?
The script seems to indicate there was.
Oh, no, I think for some reason it lists the two options. There is no,
Okay,
no
so
written
that-
objections. It gives me the
Maybe,
two options.
Okay, sorry.
So
Sorry.
nothing received. Thank you. I got you. Okay. Yeah, well, sure, just a brief. Now ask Carrie Oliphant, Director of Engineering, to present the staff report briefly,
Okay.
because I think we've
Yes,
heard it.
I understand, and I was prepared to go through it very briefly.
Thank you.
Just for the public purpose, though, this project consists of installing a 30-inch diameter transmission main on Avenue 66 to consolidate 3 small water systems. The proposed alignment is about 27,000 feet in length and will be placed within or up to approximately 50 feet from the public right-of-way along Avenue 66. The subject property is owned by approximately 14 individuals. The proposed take is a permanent easement that comprises about 0.61 acres of the larger parcel, and the larger parcel is 40 acres. We have been negotiating with the owners and the representatives of the owners. However, we're at a point where we need to move forward with the project in order to meet some funding obligations. So we are asking for the board's consideration to adopt the resolution of necessity to initiate eminent domain proceedings. So just to briefly touch on the 4 following points that Jeff Ray mentioned. So the first is the public interest and necessity required for the project. So the project's needed in order to construct domestic water facilities to provide for protection of public health, safety, and economic benefits for the region. The second is the proposed project is planned or located in a manner that will be most compatible with the greatest public good and least private injury. And we evaluated 2 alternatives. One was the no project, no alternative, and the other was to consolidate all the projects. And obviously the no project, no action alternative would not provide a safer, more reliable water supply to the existing communities. Also, it was determined that the use of the subject property provides the greatest benefit for the public good since it is vacant property. Third, the property rights described in the resolution is necessary for the proposed project, and that is, this property is necessary to install what we're calling phase 1B of this water transmission main. And finally, an offer was made to the owners of record. The offer of just compensation in the amount of $59,000 was based on an independent appraisal, and the offer was for full fair market value. In accordance, we also offered up to $5,000 to the owners to reimburse them for the cost to have their own appraisal prepared. The timing of this resolution will balance the need to give the owners as much time as possible to clear the title matters and vesting so that they may enter into an agreement, while at the same time allowing enough time for CBWD to go through the process to obtain possession in order to avoid delays to the project. So with all that being said, our recommendation is to adopt the attached resolution of necessity that's attached to this board action item to authorize legal counsel to commence an eminent domain proceeding to acquire an easement over this subject parcel, and authorize the general manager to execute any and all documents related to this eminent domain proceeding for this subject property and subject project. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. So I now declare the public hearing open and will request that those wishing to speak, please give your name, property location, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Do we have anybody?
Mr. President, I did not receive any requests, and I do not see anybody in the room or a waiting room to speak, but I can ask just to be sure that if there's any members of the public online that wish to speak on this item.
Okay, so hearing none, are there any further questions from members of the board?
None for me.
Thank you.
No, good project.
Yeah, I bet you.
I'm fine, John, thanks.
Thank you. I will now close the hearing and entertain a motion to adopt the resolution of necessity.
I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution, Mr. President.
I'll second by Nelson.
Okay, motion by Bianco, second by Nelson. Let's do a
Roll call.
roll call vote.
Thank you. President Powell,
Aye.
Vice President Estrada,
Aye.
Director Bianco,
Aye.
Director Aguilar,
Yes?
and Director Nelson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that resolution of necessity passed 5-0. Thank you, Carrie. Okay, written communications. We did have three of them listed in the board packet. And they look like they're being resolved. Information reports. Here's a little bit of a new one. We have our climate action and adaptation plan. We have a presentation by William Patterson. Is Ryan Gardner here? Is that you?
He's on the line.
That's,
I'm here.
it's hard to tell with the masks. Okay, well, go ahead.
Did you want to introduce it?
Sure, Ryan's our consultant from brought on
Last year for our
strategic initiative. Ryan's got a Zoom presentation to present to you for some information.
Ryan, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, can you pull up the slides that we had?
Sure. So staff can run it for you through here. Ryan, you'll just need to say next slide, and staff is happy to kind of click through the next slide.
Great, yeah, can you go, I think, one more ahead?
And they're just
Next
starting.
slide. Okay. And let's go to the next one. All right, so yeah, today I'm just gonna go through an update of the project and where we are so far. Just to kind of refresh everyone's memory, we're talking about the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, and kind of the primary goals of this project are to establish a inventory, a greenhouse gas inventory and kind of baseline for emissions for CVWD, and then forecast those emissions out into the future. And that's going to allow us to then see what the difference is between those emissions that are projected and the state's goals, and come up with a roadmap to reduce those emissions to align with state goals, and really set CVWD up to align with these goals and facilitate a couple of different items. So if we go to the next slide. So the main kind of benefits of doing this climate action plan, one of the major items is making you more competitive for grants and other funding sources. So more and more these programs are providing extra points for districts that have climate action plans, and more water agencies and water districts are adopting these plans.
Sylvia, this is Director Aguilar. We're not seeing the slide.
Okay, I just messaged staff to do a picture-in-picture, so give us about 5 seconds here.
There we go. Yeah, now it's up. Thank you.
Great. Other benefits that we've identified with other agencies and districts working with are cost savings and process efficiencies. So kind of this action of going through operations and kind of looking at them again at this kind of longer term perspective, we're able to see potential long-term savings by upgrading to more sustainable operations. And also public perception, climate change is becoming kind of a bigger deal in the minds of many folks, and having this plan in place kind of sets you apart and continues to identify you as a leader in the environmental space. So next slide, please. So the process overall, we're about midway through the development of this plan. We've completed the baseline greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So we looked at all of your operations for several years and quantified the greenhouse gas emissions responsible for those operations. And then we've also completed a greenhouse gas emissions forecast based on your urban water management plan projections and current operations, and also included state greenhouse gas reductions that are going to be generated by the various laws and regulations that are on the books today. And then we're currently in the process of talking through the various greenhouse gas reduction targets we might set, and starting to think about greenhouse gas reduction strategy. So what actions could CVWD take to help reduce those emissions? And then the next steps are kind of that will be next are funding and implementation and monitoring and tracking progress, and also writing the final report that we have scheduled for June and July for adoption. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the results of the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. We're actually able to do an inventory for 4 years of operation. Kind of the major takeaways from this are your largest sources of emissions are electricity consumption at 53%, which is in line with what we kind of see with a lot of water agencies and water districts. Wastewater is also a fairly large portion of your emissions. This is mostly coming from process emissions from treating wastewater at 32%. And then construction at 8%, and we looked at several years worth of your construction emissions on different projects and calculated those and then kind of amortized them on an annual basis. And then we've got less than 5% total coming from employee commutes, transmission and distribution losses, natural gas use, fleet equipment, and waste. So those kind of generally producing a small amount of emissions overall. So really those electricity and wastewater emissions are kind of the primary area where we're going to go to get reductions. Next slide, please. So based off of that 2019 greenhouse gas emissions inventory, we then did a forecast over time. So one of the big kind of takeaways here is based on the urban water management plan, the amount of water that you're expected to be providing is increasing in the short term, right? So after 2025, we see this projected increase in demand and in water delivered, and then emissions start to decrease over time. And that's mostly being driven by SB 100, which is a state regulation that requires all retail electricity to be 100% carbon free by 2045. So that big blue chunk of emissions that represents electricity is going to zero by 2045. And by that point, only wastewater and the other kind of sources, vehicle fleet, waste, construction, employee commute are remaining. So it's kind of that big reduction is going to happen without additional actions from CVWD. Next slide, please. So the process we're in right now is looking at and kind of evaluating the different greenhouse gas reduction targets that you might be wanting to set. In order to be consistent with state regulations and qualify for a lot of this extra, these kind of bonus points when applying for grants, we recommend being at least consistent with Senate Bill 32, which is a 40% reduction below 1990 levels by 2030. And then as a long-term goal, we recommend setting a target consistent with Executive Order B5518, which is carbon neutrality by 2045. And this has not been codified yet, but it does seem to be the direction the state is heading. And identifying this as a long-term goal is going to just help this plan be a bit more kind of long-lasting. And again, it's not codified, it's not binding, but it is a good long-term goal to shoot for to kind of align with what the state is working on. So what we've done as well is set a per capita reduction target, and this is really important for water agencies and water districts because it allows you to kind of neutralize the population growth variable, and also internalize the benefit of reducing water consumption on a per capita basis. So you kind of get credit for those reductions. And this is the use of per capita targets has been included in the state scoping plan, so it's a very defensible way to go. So once we kind of get some feedback on these targets and start to move forward, we'll work on reducing this gap is kind of the difference between the blue line, which is what we're projecting will happen, and the yellow line, which is the targets that we're setting. So we need to kind of make that blue line meet the yellow line by 2030 to be consistent with state goals. Next slide, please. So as well as kind of looking through and kind of thinking through these targets and what's going to be the best fit, we're also starting to think about what strategies can we take to reduce emissions. And really the biggest one that's probably going to have the most immediate and kind of straightforward implementation is using carbon-free electricity. So renewable electricity can be procured at a really competitive rate, and that's going to be, again, a way to reduce up to 50% of your emissions just through procuring green electricity. And then a little bit, still a big potential benefit, but definitely a longer-term strategy is looking at your process emissions from wastewater treatment and looking at kind of value streams like low carbon fuel standard credits and other kind of carbon sequestration credits where you might be able to generate some funding to do these projects through state projects, essentially capturing that methane and using it as power or as a biofuel, which is kind of a big opportunity, in the long term. And then other kind of short-term things, looking at electrifying fleets, electrifying buildings, and using that carbon-free electricity. And then the last little bit is going to be looking at some of the smaller emission streams like wastewater and even potential for carbon sequestration projects on CVWD-owned lands. Next slide, please. So the next steps will be continuing to work through the greenhouse gas emission reduction measures with internal working groups at CVWD, so workshopping those, figuring out what is feasible and what is most cost effective, quantifying those reductions and making sure that we can hit the targets that we've adopted, and then drafting the climate action and adaptation plan document for board review, and then finalizing the document before adoption. And then once that gets all set up, we'll set up our CapDash cloud-based implementation software that will help you track your emissions over time and kind of demonstrate that progress. It's going to make you really competitive for these grant opportunities and to bring in additional funding to do these projects.
Okay.
Next slide.
Next. Thank you. So if you go back to slide 9, this one on the right, electrify existing buildings, don't we already do that? But how is that different than what we're doing now?
Yeah, so this is looking at kind of getting, it's going to be a pretty small level of emissions, but you do have some natural gas use. So this is one way that a lot of organizations, water districts, municipalities, others are looking at just reducing that bit of fossil fuel emissions. So probably not a huge strategy for you as far as getting to your greenhouse gas reduction goals, but one thing that we do want to look at is make sure that larger natural gas consuming equipment is being phased out at end of life. It'll also help potentially get in front of some of regulations that are coming down around electrification.
Okay, so as you do this, I've heard you say the word cost effective or cost efficient. Do we know what the cost of this is?
So at this time, we don't have costs for hitting these targets yet. I think in the short term, the costs are going to be driven mostly by cost differentials between energy sources. And there's a lot of different ways we can go about this. So one of the things that we will do is as we start to hone in on we look at feasibility first, are these measures and actions feasible? And then once we get there we can start looking at how much is this going to cost. And for example, with electricity procurement, there may be some opportunities to sign a PPA at a a power purchase agreement at a really low rate for renewable and storage, for example, and provide you with, resiliency to your operations and also carbon-free electricity that'll drop your emissions significantly. And that could be at a rate that's lower than what you're paying now, with the downside of kind of locking you into that rate. And it being a larger project, or it may be slightly more expensive on a per megawatt basis procurement of electricity just from the, IID or other electricity provider, SCE. So those are kind of options that we'll look at and kind of present in final versions of the CAP once we get these measures sorted out.
All right.
And on costs as well, just kind of a lot of sustainability, I guess, and climate action in general. There are generally upfront costs for doing some of these things, but long-term savings. And that's where we're going to look at how can funding and financing help smooth those upfront costs out, or even remove them with like a grant opportunity or something along those lines. So we'll have more information on that as we kind of get into the weeds of these measures a bit more.
All right. Any comments or questions from other board members? No.
Sounds expensive.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure the formulas they use to calculate what it costs are not straight line math. They'll have some, you'll weight various things for certain reasons.
President Powell, this is Director Aguilar. I have a couple questions, please. I'm not sure if this would go to the presenter or to staff, but right now, perhaps one of our operations people, right now we have the option, I believe, when we procure power, we pay our bills, to identify a potential energy carbon-free source. So I'd like to have that confirmed. And then secondly, you mentioned somewhere in your mentioned that this will enable us to get more points for grants. I think Cap and Trade was specifically mentioned. So my second question is, do you currently get Cap and Trade grants? And if not, will this open us up to new Cap and Trade money that's existing or that future money? Thank you.
Yeah, so I know at least, I'm not sure about Imperial Irrigation District as far as being able to procure, go into a program for green electricity, but I believe SCE is your other provider, and they definitely do. So there are opportunities there to kind of just check a box and reduce emissions pretty significantly. The other question around Cap and Trade, I think LCSF, or Low Carbon Fuel Standard, is a really big deal for the state moving forward, and that's kind of generating these carbon-free fuel sources, renewable natural gas, renewable fuels. So as those types of programs are interesting because not only are there programs available to pay some of the upfront costs, like a grant or a financing opportunity, but they also generate revenue over time. So one technology that we're looking at in some other locations are actually these package plants that can take biofuels or essentially methane from wastewater treatment processes and turn that into hydrogen and renewable diesel, and then sequester the emissions from that. So you're essentially making these value products out of a waste product, selling those, capturing low carbon fuel standard money, and sequestering carbon and capturing carbon credits for that. So there's multiple streams of revenue that could happen from that. And these are big capital projects and definitely, longer term things that are going to have to be looked at. But some of these we're hoping that we can at least identify for you. So as opportunities come up at the state level, you'll be well positioned to go after them.
I appreciate that. And my last comment is that Palm Desert is a member of the Desert Communities Energy Authority, and they have in many ways already gone through this process. There's got to be a ton of information that they can share and provide with us without having to reinvent the wheel. So I would strongly encourage you to talk to Katie Barrows at DCE in Palm Desert and spend some time with them to get the benefit of their work they've already completed on this.
So, Mr. President, I just want to say that you know, I'm not interested in.
Is your mic on, Director Bianco?
Yes. I'm not interested in going farther than the state is asking us to do, so I just wanted to make that clear. So, I mean, some of these have some, I mean, we're doing a lot of this because it's a mandated project, so I just want to make that clear that I, as a board member, not interested in going above and beyond what our requirements are.
Okay. Anything from Director Nelson?
I agree with Director Bianco.
And Vice President Estrada, any comments?
Same comment.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I imagine if we looked at something that wasn't mandated, but that it might either be grant funding eligible or could help us get grant funding for some other purpose, there may be a cost benefit that makes sense. I have no idea, but who knows? Well, thank you, Ryan. Thank you. And Bill. And so why don't we move on to the second item, which is Salton Sea activities update. William Patterson.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Giving you a biannual update on activities around the Salton Sea. Start with just some general conditions at the Salton Sea. Compared to this time last year, you're about a foot to 1.25 feet lower. Currently sitting around minus 238, slightly above the modeled prediction. When you say slightly above, does that mean it hasn't receded much or receded much? It has not receded as much as originally modeled in the QSA documentation. In that model, they anticipated that we'd have about 7,000 additional acres of exposed playa in 2020 compared to 2019, bringing the total to about 31,000 acres. That has not been verified, and it's slightly overestimated due to the vegetation that's naturally establishing on the exposed playa. And we're looking to have some updates hopefully in 2021. The salinity is increased to 74,000 milligrams per liter, over twice the level in ocean water. And that's collected at various points throughout the sea as an average. Fish and bird populations that are being monitored have some highs and lows. Desert pupfish doing relatively well in the northern playa drains and in some of those shoreline pools that were monitored for the first time in 2020. Tilapia are still present in low numbers. Piscivorous birds are at a record low since 2016. However, we're seeing some of the shoreline birds at some of the highest levels that we've seen in many, many years. Air quality, and some of the data that's been presented, we haven't seen a discernible increase from 2019 and 2020 for emissive playa locations. However, compared to 2010, we are seeing an increase in emissivity from the northern playa. But the highest PM10 readings are still observed on the western shore in Imperial County. There has been an increase in the staff brought on by the state to, in an effort to deliver projects. In 2020, there was 4 staff added to CDFW and 2 staff added to the Department of Water Resources, and we can expect additional staff being added this year. This is a time scale of the 2 major components of the Salton Sea Management Plan, the 10-year plan and the long-term plan. Right now, we can see that the team is working on the dust suppression action plan, particularly the species conservation habitat project, and also working through the 10-year NEPA planning document that will come out in the summer and in the fall. Also on the long-range plan, they're working on developing the plan, but also recently addressing the water importation feasibility analysis that was somewhat delayed. So some highlights from the Salton Sea Management Plan 10-year plan. One of the main components that's happening is the Species Habitat Conservation Plan as part of the Dust Suppression Action Plan. In that action plan, they're looking at about 3,800 acres in the south end of the Salton Sea in Phase A and 4,400 acres in the north end in Phase B. They initiated the SCH project in 2020, and they did some temporary surface roughening to address some air quality issues there while they're working to develop some of the habitat type projects that are needed. And that's all in the vicinity of the New River, and you can see down in the figure in the purple area. They're also working on a programmatic NEPA document for the 10-year plan. And that can be, they did do a review of the project description last year, and they're going to be working to release that draft document and finalize that document this year. And there has been some discussion about that document also doubling as a watershed plan and utilizing NRCS funding in the tune of about $650,000. The draft project descriptions went out for public comment. There was many comments received, and we'll see those comments addressed in the draft plan as it's released, and that should be sometime this summer. We also know that the SMMP is investigating dust emissions separately from IID as they have in the past, and looking to verify some of those results and make recommendations for revisions to the dust suppression action plan. Next slide. Here's a little more detail about the Species Conservation Habitat Plan. This is considered a cornerstone project for the Salton Sea Management Plan. They selected Kiewit last year. The cost is anticipated about $206.5 million, and compared to the $346.7 million that's appropriated, that is a large portion of that funding. And also here you can kind of see some of the temporary dust suppression activities that have occurred that have totaled the 775 acres that have been completed in 2020. Recently, we heard that UC Santa Cruz was selected to be the independent expert review panel. They're led by Professor Brent Haddad, PhD, and they're going to be looking at the water importation feasibility. That's expected to begin in June 2021 and conclude in the summer of 2022. So the next step there would just to be hearing who they select, the formation of the panel, and probably some public outreach. Overall, there was some increased funding that was received in 2020. We had an additional $20 million in state funding authorized and $56 million appropriated. And there's been no change in the federal contribution. One of the sources of information that we're tracking is the Salton Sea Authority. There are some highlights here, mainly the WRDA Act that was signed last year allows the Corps to conduct a feasibility study for the Salton Sea Perimeter Lake, and that can be funded wholly by an independent party or in partnership with the Corps at 50-50 cost share and capped at $3 million. We expect the Salton Sea Authority will be involved in that process. Also involved will be Riverside County. There was also some funding allocated for that, about $20 million to get through the North Lake demonstration project. The Salton Sea Authority is also seeking funding to advance the SSMP, targeting about $500 million, and they're tracking a lot of the legislation. There are some proposed legislation that have the potential to bring funding to the Salton Sea. HR 491, HR 8775, and the American Rescue Plan. And we're also tracking the New River Improvement Project, include trash screens, aerators, wetlands, pumps, bypass system, and a river parkway concept that's been talked about for a long time. And more recently we heard they were now considering again water treatment facilities, which has kind of been on and off the table. Some other information sources that we're tracking, obviously the QSA implementation team, the five agency panel, and some of the major highlights here coming out of that discussion is the reports that were submitted just recently in March 2021. Is their annual update and report for the QSA mitigation measures, and it includes appendices that are really good information in regards to the California Endangered Species Act, crop production, and water allocation. IID is also leading the way on a desert pupfish drain connectivity study that includes the ag drains in the Salton Sea and CVWD facilities in the northern part of the sea. We did get some preliminary numbers back that some of these populations are doing relatively well. In certain areas, they were recorded at record levels. So it's one of the positives, I suppose, for the Salton Sea. Like I said before, we're looking to understand the formation a little bit of the Salton Sea playa and these ponded habitats, and IID collected some LIDAR data. It's just a advanced data set, imagery data set to look at and analyze and provide background information on how those areas can be managed and understood. They continue to monitor dust emissions on the playa and the developing annual reports and recommendations in their proactive dust control plan that is released annually. They continue to monitor selenium in agricultural drains. There was a large-scale burrowing owl survey effort completed in 2020, and they're also continuing to work on their managed marsh down in Imperial County on the Eastern Shore, and that effort is a significant effort in developing some riparian habitat, planting, and working through some of the challenges that we're seeing in the soil conditions and climate conditions that are making it difficult. Yes. So some of the other actions, thanks, Steve. Some of the other actions that are occurring around the Salton Sea, one project that you may have heard of is Red Hill Bay. It's a 530-acre wetlands project that was initiated by ID and U.S. and Fish and Wildlife Service. And that project was cited by the Imperial County Air Pollution Control District for lack of progress in dust control measures. Last year, there's been several violation hearings that have taken place. It's ongoing. They have not received resolution. And we do know that IID may be seeking QSA JPA funding to address the issues, even though this project was outside of the QSA. It's related to the conditions of the Salton Sea. Some other things that are occurring, lithium extraction. We know that there was a 14-member Blue Ribbon committee set in February 2021. This panel is charged with reviewing potential development opportunities while coordinating with the Salton Sea staff for consistency. Some of the agencies that, notable agencies that are part of that 14-member panel were the, obviously, California Natural Resources Agency, Public Utility Commissions, IID, Torres-Martinez, and Imperial County. CBWD was not appointed to that panel or had a representative there. The Desert Shores Restoration Project is moving forward with Imperial County Air Pollution Control District, and the Salton Sea Management Plan. They're looking at the design, water availability, and funding allocation to move forward with that restoration project. AB 617 is another activity that's occurring with the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and that's focused on the Eastern Coachella Valley Air Quality Management Plan. And their community steering committee was doing some meetings in January 2021, looking at the concerns and strategies, and they're developing the community emissions reduction plan, which would include an interactive map and information available on the SCAQMD online website. Just some other things that I did not get on here. The Bombay Beach Wetlands Project is a 750-acre wetland restoration project that's being promoted by the Audubon Society and is partnering with some of the participating agencies in the Salton Sea. And then also the dredging of the North Shore Yacht Club. We improved the boat ramp last year, and we can expect that they may be looking to improve the access to the Salton Sea for continued research and development. And that brings me to the end of the presentation, and I can open it up for any questions or comments.
Thank you. Okay, well, they got the staff up. It's kind of, you know, they add staff and then they decide to go back and look at the things they've already looked at before. It's kind of discouraging in my opinion. Any comments from board members on the phone?
President Powell, I have some comments.
Go ahead.
So some good news. The agreement between DWR and the Salton Sea Authority for that $19.25 million was executed yesterday. So that's a good thing. Related to the NEPA document, I think that you referenced, William. I don't know if you can expand on this because I'm having trouble understanding it, but I think at one point we were trying to capture the North Lake demonstration project within that NEPA document so that we could clear the environmental. And I think we went back and forth, and for some reason, sounds like we're not able to capture any of the alternatives. As you know, I think right now there's 4 alternatives being considered to situate that that North Lake project, and we were trying to get a sense of whether any of those alternatives could fit within the parameters and the areas that were identified within that NEPA document. And I think what I'm hearing is that perhaps that's not going to be an easy task. So the other idea was that perhaps we would move on this, do some sort of legislative action to try to get some sort of environmental exception. I know that there was some coordination with some of the NGOs and the environmental folks to see if that was something that they would perhaps support, or whether they would make noise against it. Have you heard of anything related to that?
I have not. I'm expecting to see the draft environmental document. I just know that in general, for a programmatic document, that was to be included. The detail may be in a project-specific CEQA document if it does not fit into a programmatic.
Okay, so I think that's what we're going to have to end up doing, is kind of start its own environmental process. So I think we were waiting to have that document executed, the agreement between DWR and Salton Sea Authority, to really start kind of moving on the schedule related to design and, are we going to go with alternative 1, alternative 3, 4, whatever. And it sounds like there's no one alternative that puts us in a quicker path versus another. So our preferred alternative was alternative 4, which is makes use of the existing facilities around the yacht club. I think it kind of takes it from the state park all the way to the yacht club. And I think what that's going to do also is put a little bit of a pause on that dredging project, so that we can maximize the dollars that are being allocated for both of those projects, and not, fully go on a design with the dredging project, which I think is a little bit further along as it relates to being able to use the money for designing a project. But we didn't want to get too ahead of ourselves without it really being part of this bigger project that is really going to surround it. So that's something to be aware of. The other thing related to, I think you mentioned that the state said that they are going to try to use that NEPA document also as the watershed plan. Is that what you said?
I just remember the last time that was brought up in one of your meetings, that was a point of discussion, and it sounded like there was more discussion about the potential scenario where the state would be looking to utilize NRCS funding to complete that document, and would need to establish
the Salton Sea Authority,
that watershed plan.
Well, the Salton Sea Authority worked with Lisa Moore to try to get the farm bill through and somehow allow us to put the Salton Sea Authority in a place where we can tap into those monies. But it required us to, in order, much like the Irwin program required you to do the Integrated Regional Water Management Group planning in order to tap into those funds, this requires us to do the watershed plan in order for us to qualify to tap into those pots of money, which I think is like $500 million or something like that. And so we, I think, did the application, the Salton Sea Authority did the application, but the funding went straight to the state, and the state has been sitting on that money for, I think, over 2 years now, if not more. And what we've done is, at least twice now, we've sent a letter to Secretary Crowfoot, basically asking them to give us an update on this watershed plan, because we're missing an opportunity here. We secured those $650,000 in order to put this plan together, and it hasn't been complete. I think last time when I was chair last year, we sent a letter to Mr. Crowfoot directly, kind of making the request that if perhaps they were too busy with other things, that we would be happy at the Salton Sea Authority to complete that watershed plan if they were if that's something that would expedite the completion of that plan. So I don't know where that's at, but I wanted to mention it just so that the rest of the directors were aware of kind of where that's been at. And then related to the QSA stuff, my understanding is that the board is going to have a full presentation at the next board meeting, and it sounds like perhaps it's going to be Mr. Delgado with the state who's going to give us a quick overview of some of the QSA implementation projects, what the makeup of that is, the purpose of those dollars are, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, lots of things happening. But I think on our side, one of the most exciting is the fact that we finally have an executed agreement between DWR and the Salton Sea Authority for $20 million, and we've been working on that for about 2 years now. So it's a good thing that we're here at least to that point. Those are my comments.
Thank you.
That's good news. Congratulations.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, William.
Thanks, William.
Thank you.
On to action items. Looks like there's 5 of those. First is the engineering reports on the water supply replenishment assessment for the 3 areas. Zoe Rodriguez Del Rey, good morning.
Good morning, President Powell, members of the board. Today's board action item consists of presenting and having the board acknowledge receipt of fiscal year 2022 engineers report on water supply and replenishment assessments. Staff will also be publishing and mailing notices to producers of record with information on the proposed replenishment assessment increases specific to fiscal year 2022. And that action is required by State Water Code section 31631.5. There will be a public hearing that is scheduled for June 2nd at 1:30 p.m. For the board to consider those rate increases. We do have a brief presentation for the board and the public today, highlighting the main items that are required in the engineer's report, including conditions of the groundwater basin and the proposed replenishment assessment charges for fiscal year 2022. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and begin the presentation. This presentation is being provided in a collaborative manner with finance. So if there are specific questions to the finance piece, Mr. Keel will be available to answer those. And with that, I'll go ahead and proceed.
Thank you.
So the fiscal year 2022 engineers report provides updates on the conditions of the groundwater basins that are underlie the areas of benefit. These are based on the work done for the SGMA annual reports, which we presented to the board earlier this year. As required, it does provide updates on calendar year-based production and replenishment data. It does include updated income statements, including projections for fiscal year 2022, and provides recommendations on the replenishment assessments for that fiscal year 2022. These recommendations are consistent with the cost of service study that has been completed and presented to the board, and consistent with the rate of schedule that was mailed out in the Proposition 218 for the east and west Whitewater River Subbasin area of benefits. So in the Mission Creek Subbasin area of benefit in calendar year 2020, Coachella Valley Water District pumped 4,655 acre feet, subject to the replenishment assessment charge. Or let me clarify that. Within the area, there was pumped by CVWD and other private pumpers, 4,655 acre feet, subject to the replenishment assessment. Within DWA's area of benefit, it was 9,589 for a total of 14,244 for the entire management area. The replenished amount at Mission Creek Groundwater Replenishment Facility for the calendar year was 1,768 acre feet. This graphic shows changes in groundwater level over a one-year period. Again, these are based on the SGMA annual report, so they are changes based on that reporting requirement of the water year. Everything from very light yellow onto green represents an increase. And as you can see in the legend, it's in the rate of 0 to 5 feet of increase. So the overall conclusion from this is over that one-year period, groundwater levels in the management area were stable or slightly increasing. This next graphic, same concept, but over a 10-year period, with increasing green meaning increasing groundwater levels. So as you can see here, the majority of the subbasin over a 10-year period has experienced groundwater level increases in the range of up to 20 feet. You do see some small declines increasing towards the facility, and that's more driven by the variability of replenishment than anything to have to do with the overall groundwater conditions. Showing a couple of key hydrographs in the subbasin. The one shown at the top of the graph is near the replenishment facility, and of course, it shows that variability in replenishment, particularly those big years of replenishment in the 2010, 2011 time period. The other key wells in the subbasin show very good stability in terms of groundwater levels and storage as a proxy. For the Mission Creek Subbasin area of benefit, it's recommended that the RAC remain at $135.52 per acre foot. It is projected that for fiscal year 2022, there'll be just a slight increase in net cash flow, and ending reserves are projected to meet the board established targets. Moving on to the West Whitewater River Subbasin area of benefit, production within the CVWD area of benefit by RAC producers, so production subject to the replenishment assessment charge, was 117,770 acre feet. Within the DWA or Desert Water Agency area of benefit, it was 36,209. For a total for the management area of almost 154,000 acre feet. Replenishment delivered in calendar year 2020 was 136,187. And I'm going to note a slight correction to this. This actually also includes the amount replenished at Palm Desert. So the total for the West AOB was 136,187 for the calendar year. Similar to the Mission Creek, the one-year change in groundwater levels, we see mostly green with a little bit of yellow. So the overall picture there is increasing groundwater levels in the more western part and stable in the more eastern part of the AOB over a one-year period. And we are seeing the dissipation further down gradient of those several consecutive years that we have of very large levels of recharge. Over the 10-year period, it's a similar story. Groundwater levels are either increasing or stable. There's some localized areas of decrease, but they're very, very localized. In terms of the hydrographs, again, the one that's shown highest in the graph is near the replenishment facility and shows that variability. As we move down gradient, the black diamond graph shows those increases beginning in about 2017. Again, 2017 record replenishment followed by other years of big replenishment. Moving further down gradient, stable groundwater levels at Key Wells. I do want to just briefly point to the blue diamond, which is near Warp 10. And that well is already starting to see very near the Palm Desert Groundwater Replenishment Facility is seeing the impact of those replenishment activities, which began in early 2019. For the West Whitewater River Subbasin Area of Benefit, it is recommended that the RAC replenishment assessment charge be increased by 15% from $143.80 an acre foot to $165.37 an acre foot. Projected for fiscal year 2022 is decreases in net cash flow of yes, and ending reserve, but despite those decreases, the ending reserves are still projected to meet targets. And finally, moving to the East Whitewater River Subbasin AOB, groundwater production was 117,925, and replenishment at Thomas E. Levy was 37,536 acre feet. The 1-year change, just very stable, both in terms of production, replenishment, so we're seeing very stabilized over a 1-year period. When looking at the 10-year change in storage, we have, and this is something that we've shared with the board, we've seen, seen increases throughout most of the basin, 40 feet, and higher as you're closer to the actual replenishment facility. Yes.
I know it hasn't been very long since we started doing Palm Desert replenishment facility, but do we see any spillover from west to east?
Inevitably.
Or has it just not been long enough? It may not just be long enough. It'd take more years, probably.
Yeah, so we would be looking for response at Key Wells, and we just have not seen that rebound in wells that are down gradient. Right now, we're mostly seeing it at wells nearby, and at the risk of delving a little bit too much into this, there is some amount of clay layers underneath in this area. So the idea is that the shallower levels would rise first, and then that water will start spilling over. You can't see it as well in this, but when I presented on the Sigma annual reports, we did kind of zoom in into that area, and we are beginning to see groundwater level increases at deeper wells that are close to the facility, but we're not seeing that impact, say, in wells that are further away that are at that demarcation between the west and the east. But it is something that now that we have 2 years, going on 2 years of replenishment, we are going to do a retrospective 2 years looking at all the data that we've been collecting. Recall that the board authorized drilling of wells in the vicinity shallow, and that we have an established monitoring network. So we will be looking at that impact and see where we're at, and that's something that we're happy to share.
Yeah, so I mean, the Levy facility, it was real centralized, but now over time, it seems to be that it's just getting wider and wider. So maybe we'll see the same thing with Palm Desert. As more time goes on and more water we put in there, we'll see this widening. It'll be interesting to see if it can go over, if there's enough water being put in the ground that goes over the hump or mountain that may be separating, Washington Street somewhere in there. It'll be interesting to see over time, but I know it takes years.
And the feasibility study also showed that it would have positive impacts on groundwater levels upstream as well. I don't want to delve into that too much because it was modeled, the scenario that was modeled that was closest to what we had planned on doing did include the 15,000 of phase 2, which, as we know, currently that's working through the permitting process. But we expect that it will have positive
more
impacts on
benefits.
groundwater levels in that area and upstream as well as downstream. And we're tracking that through the monitoring network.
Thank you.
Hey, Zoe, this is Peter. I have a comment and a question. When I look at slide 10, which is the west area, the boundaries seem to have kind of a green shade to them on slide 10.
I'm going to go back to 10 here for just a second.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. See how the boundary has, is that the I know, I see the dark green line, but it's kind of shaded. Is that indicative of water level, or is that just the boundary?
Just the boundary.
That's just the boundary, and it was a way to try and show the full management area, but really highlight with the darker green the portion that is our area of benefit managed by
Then
CDBG.
if I compare that, because that's a little confusing to me, because see how that the far west side is very green up there. So it looks like that water's almost bounding, it's almost rising around the boundary. So when you look at that compared to 15, 15 doesn't have that boundary, or it doesn't have that shading on the edge at all. So if you could just make those consistent, that'd be helpful.
Okay, that's an easy fix, and it's, yes, so with the east, there's no shared management area, but noted that that color ramp is probably too close, and we can adjust the boundary so that we show both the management area and CBWD's area of benefit.
Yeah.
That'd be good, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a graphic technique in displaying that boundary. So I understand what he's saying. I mean, even outside the boundary, when it shows that area kind of to the east and up above. I mean,
yeah, it's the same color. It's the same color.
Yeah.
It's the same color.
It looks like a wave around the boundary, but it's not.
It's a wave crashing in.
Noted. Noted. Sometimes we look at this so often that we stop seeing everything but the big message, but we want to make it as consumable as possible. So for next year, you will see a different boundary color that does not cause such confusion.
15 is not ambiguous that way.
Yes.
No waves.
Right, correct.
So
Thank you.
I think I was in this area, and just going to speed it up a little bit. The small yellow circles is the well closest to the facility, and it shows just that increase, but that we're beginning to stabilize at current replenishment levels. And otherwise, the remaining of the wells either show increases if they're closer to the facility or stabilization, and that's wells that are located with, just some key wells with long history that are located and distributed throughout the area of benefit. For the East Whitewater River Subbasin area of benefit, the recommended replenishment assessment, it's recommended to increase it by 9.5% for fiscal year 2022 from $66 to $72.27. Projecting that will result in a net positive change in cash flow, but ending reserves that are below the board's target. But of course, that's all addressed through the other elements of the cost of service, which is 5-year as opposed to this focusing on fiscal year 2022. So that brings my presentation to the end. So I'm happy to take any questions. And Mr. Keel's here. Help me if there's any questions that are outside of my ability to provide you with an answer.
No. And we did get bound copies of the report up at the dais, so for those not attending, they're here.
That's a good point. We went ahead and published it a day early on our website so that it was available, which is one of the requirements. So for anybody who would like to inspect the report prior to the public hearing, it is available on CVWD's website.
All right.
So Zoe, is there an action here you're asking the board to take? Are you asking them to accept it, or to receive it, or actually to approve it without actually approving the rates, because that's a separate process?
Correct. So the request today is just as required by State Water Code to acknowledge receipt of the engineer's report for fiscal year 2022.
So the board can entertain a motion to approve the staff recommendation.
Okay.
Which is to accept the report.
And then to do all.
Acknowledge receipt of the report.
I'll make a motion to acknowledge
So
receipt of the report.
I'll second that motion to acknowledge and receive the report.
Okay. All right, great. Roll call, please.
President Powell,
Aye.
Vice President Estrada,
Aye.
Director Bianco,
Aye.
Director Aguilar,
Yes?
and
Aye.
Director Nelson. Oh, I heard the yes.
4 ayes and a yes.
We good?
Yeah.
All right,
Director Nelson.
that passed 5-0. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you.
Next is 11B. This is the España, GID España agreement.
Yes, good
Carrie
morning.
Oliphant, go ahead.
So it is recommended the Board of Directors authorize the General Manager to execute the stormwater system installation agreement with GID España LLC. The agreement provides for the developer to convey the necessary land to CVWD for the project in order for us to construct the flood control channels on the España project. And in addition, as part of the agreement, CVWD is dedicating easements for access and utility purposes across the flood control channels on both the north and south sides of the España property. Therefore, this board action item is also to authorize the general manager to execute these easement documents and any other documents associated with the agreement. And the España development is located in North Indio, Adams Street to the west, Avenue 39 to the north, and Avenue 40 to the south. I can go into more details about the agreement if you're interested, but it is outlined in this board action memo, so I'll stop there unless there's any questions, or you'd like me to proceed.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would move approval.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Director Nelson, second by Bianco. Roll call, please.
President Powell,
Aye.
Vice President Estrada,
Aye.
Director Bianco,
Aye.
Director Aguilar,
Yes?
and Director Nelson.
Aye.
Thank you.
So that passed 5-0. Thanks, Carrie. 11C, Armando Rodriguez, Fairway Drive.
Good morning, President Powell, members of the board, audience, and fellow staff. We're seeking board authorization for staff to solicit bids for the construction of the sewer pipeline rehabilitation along Fairway Drive, project specification number 20-65. Would you like a presentation, or do you have any specific questions that you would like to address?
Again, the idea here is to bring these projects to the board before we put them out for bid, just to make sure we don't exercise the construction community if the board decides not to proceed after we get the bid results in.
I don't have any questions. Anybody else?
Do not.
All right, so is there a motion to approve authorizing this execution of this agreement? I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong one. It's to solicit these bids. Okay.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Second by Estrada. Okay, good. Roll call, please.
President Powell,
Aye.
Vice President Estrada,
Aye.
Director Bianco,
Aye.
Director Aguilar,
Yes.
and Director Nelson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, that passed 5-0. 11D. David Wilson, good morning.
Good morning. Purpose of this item is to authorize the general manager to execute a professional services agreement with Aspen Environmental Group in the amount of $97,094 to perform additional environmental study services for the Thousand Palms Flood Control Project. The request includes a contingency budget of $10,000. The total cost of this request is $107,094. The project requires extensive environmental review and regulatory compliance. This PSA will provide funding for services to cover additional and unforeseen regulatory hurdles to allow us to complete the EIR, EIS. The project is included in the FY21 Stormwater Fund in the amount of $250,000. We have approximately $105,000 still remaining in that budget, which of course is not enough to cover this request. However, we expect that this request will only utilize about $50,000 this fiscal year, and the remaining balance will be budgeted for next fiscal year. Therefore, there will be no adverse impact to the budget. And I will stop my presentation there and take any questions.
Thank you. Nope.
I have an overall question regarding the Thousand Palms Flood Control District is, how much longer or how much more work is there to complete this type of work before we can actually have it ready to go and permit it and move to a solicitation of bids?
Once we get the environmental document, we expect the current pace of the environmental review to bring us to the end of this calendar year, ideally at the latest. With that, we will be able to move into land acquisition. We need to acquire 550 acres of land to construct the project. We would expect that project to be at least 2 years, or rather the acquisition to take at least 2 years. And then we could advertise for bids to construct.
So 3 years.
Yes.
Thank you, David.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second. Director Aguilar?
Thank you. We have a motion and a second.
President Powell.
And roll call vote.
Sorry.
I vote aye.
Vice President Estrada.
Aye.
Director Bianco.
Aye.
Director Aguilar.
Yes.
And Director Nelson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye, David, and you got E also. That passed 5-0.
So, Mr. President, this is item E.
Oh, this one is two directors recused.
Yes. So if I may, at this point, we would request that the recused directors, Nelson and Bianco, leave the meeting. The requalified President John Powell may participate in this matter regarding the Oasis project. The recusal and requalification process was conducted now a couple of years ago because there were 3 board members who had a potential financial interest in areas that would be impacted by the Oasis project. So at this point, we recommend we proceed with the 3 directors who are qualified to consider this matter.
Thank you. So I see that.
Sylvia, how would you like to work the logistics of this, coming back to report on the meetings?
So if you'd like, I can, if you log off, I will text you as soon as we're done and we'll give you a minute or so to log back into the meeting.
Perfect.
Okay.
See you in a bit.
Okay, thank you.
You can probably just go in the waiting room.
Yeah.
Very well. So we have 2 directors have left the meeting, and so we're ready to go, David.
All right, very good. All right, the purpose of this item is to authorize the general manager to execute a purchase and sale agreement and joint escrow instructions with Theodore J. Fish III and Donna Brommel Fish. The purchase and sale agreement includes an acquisition of a 1.04 acre portion of their existing parcel in the amount of $150,000. And the request also comes with a request to execute a budget amendment in the amount of $8,855,477 to address the current pace of construction. The total cost of this request, which includes title, escrow, and closing costs, and a 5% contingency, is $162,750. The budget amendment request here will bring the total budget for this fiscal year to $10,315,624. As far as the Oasis project is concerned, this is a net zero change in the total budget for the Oasis project. Again, this is just intended to address the pace of construction for the project itself. And with that, I'll just close and take any questions.
Yeah, I mean, I read the letter. It was the last item on the attachments. I thought that was pretty much told the story. Okay. I believe, I don't really know exactly who these people are, but I know Ted Fish used to be a director of Coachella Valley Water District. I'm thinking that he may have passed away and Donna would be his, what's his wife? Is that right?
Well, I've been speaking to a Ted Fish, although maybe his son. He is the.
Yeah, I mean, he would be, I don't know. We don't have any historians in the room, huh?
No, we lost Bob Keyran a while ago.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's either his son or his grandson.
I think one of those guys on the wall is a Fish.
No.
No?
No. But he was on the board in the late 90s. Anyways, I think it's the same family, but and I think Donna might have been his wife. Fair enough. Is there a motion to approve this acquisition, this purchase and sale agreement?
Mr. President, this is Director Aguilar. I'll go ahead and make the motion to approve and execute the agreement.
Thank you.
I'll make a second just for purpose of discussion. I do have a general question.
Yeah, go ahead with the discussion, please.
I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. And what I think I heard David said is this is a net zero change in the overall budget. Seems like what we're doing here is we're moving budget, making an amendment just to keep up with the pace of construction. That's the bulk of I think we said we end up at 10 million, but 8 million. And then as it relates to the acquisition of the parcel, you said it was like 50 or something, but then the contingency took it to 162. And the size of that parcel was what, 1.4 acres?
1.04.
1.04.
Correct.
And that came back with an appraisal. What was the amount?
The original appraisal was for $60,000.
For 60,000, and how much are we paying for this parcel?
$150,000.
Why is it more than double?
That we went through, I tried to explain it in the board report here, but in general, the original location proposed for this site was right on the northwest corner of Harrison and Polk Street. Well, let me back up. The project has been going on for multiple years. The expectation when we went to have another go at the project was that the reception by the folks out there in the Oasis area was going to be the same, and in general, that was the case. However, on this particular parcel, we received, I think, an unexpected pushback, specifically as it relates to the location that we were proposing to have this Oasis West pump station, which again was on the northwest corner here, which Mr. Fish saw as prime commercial real estate, certainly in the far future at a minimum. And we worked with a couple of different locations. We, as I outlined in the board memo, the original location, Mr. Fish came back with $270,000 request, which was a request that we found to be unacceptable. And so we engaged with another property owner, which in this case was the University of Riverside, or University of California, Riverside, for two locations south of Avenue 70. Those locations, or rather, we went back and forth with Riverside, had some good conversations with them. Them being a public agency, there was concern with their ability to be able to meet our schedule. The conversation with UCR stalled. We didn't sever our ties with Mr. Fish yet, so we re-engaged, and we looked at ways that we could address his concern to maintain commercial viability on that northwest corner there, and to minimize impacts to what would be his future remainder parcel once he's subdivided for that commercial site, which is what we did. And the result was the site that we chose, it actually impacted more trees than originally planned, but that negotiation brought us down to this $150K.
So can you go back to that exhibit you have there?
It's on the screen.
That yellow portion there is that all his property, and we're just getting 1 acre out of that?
Yes.
And the acre that we're getting, where is it in general, in that yellow polygon there?
There's a little polygon there. That actual location is not the correct one. Actually, after we did this, we moved it slightly further west. If you can see the line, there's kind of a white line that's at a diagonal going north-south or kind of northwest. Immediately west of that, and our westerly or easterly PL for this pump station follows that alignment of that kind of white area there. So he's able to maintain that.
I'm gonna open up the exhibit on my computer because I'm having a hard time looking at the.
On this exhibit, it's roughly, the site would be roughly where the 7 is on 70th Avenue.
What am I looking for? Am I looking for something? I'm like zoomed in into the exhibit on my computer, and is it highlighted by an orange line?
There's a gold geometric shape. I think once you zoom in, it's kind of blurry.
Yep. There is an orange mark, but I think David said that the actual site is to the west of that.
Yes.
Closer to above the number 7 on
Exactly.
70.
Okay, but I don't really see anything else depicting that area. All I see, and maybe my computer shows it different, but all I see is a shaded parcel, which is the entire APN, and then I'm having a really hard time trying to figure out what the 1 acre is within that polygon.
Yeah.
It's,
Well, if you go to the sort of triangular corner of his property, it looks like it's going to be west of that little corner by what, 1,000 feet or something? Not even that, maybe 400 feet.
I think it was 600 feet from the corner.
600 feet from the corner?
Yes.
So if you go all the way to the right side of that polygon, it's right along 70th Avenue, but 600 feet west of the corner.
So did you say we're requiring an acre running along Avenue 70, the entire frontage of that APN, or are we what are we citing, pipe, or are we citing some other infrastructure?
It's a pump station. And the frontage along Avenue 70 is roughly 220 feet, I want to say. And the rest of it goes into the parcel.
It's almost a square.
It is.
And then you said that yeah, you know what? I'm just having a hard time. I don't know if that orange is behind that other orange showing the pipe alignment. I don't know if the easement polygon is behind, or whatever we're acquiring is behind that Avenue 70 is just over behind it, so, but whatever. What I'm more interested in is because I'm still having a hard time understanding the story you just told us about.
I think
about so.
If you look at the letter, if you look at Wayndahl's letter, Costello,
yep.
It pretty much says that we made the offer based on the appraisal. They initially accepted it, then they went and got a lawyer, and they decided that they could get more money out of us. So they reversed their acceptance and asked for a considerably larger amount of money. And given the time constraints, we settled on an intermediate number between the appraisal and their ask.
And if I may, the issue would be whether there was a gift of public funds. Here, it's been explained what needs to be done, the timing of which, the response of the property owner, the fact that staff also sought an additional different source to acquire property from UCR, that not working, taking into account as President Powell said, the status of negotiations and timing facing the district, and the cost it would take to buy or acquire other property. There's more than enough in this administrative record to show there's not a gift of public funds, and this is a reasonable price considering the challenges and the need to move forward.
So, David, can you restate who we try to get once we got this refusal, and then you said we went to look at some UCR property?
Yes.
What was the issue with UCR?
We located two sites with UCR, and they were non-committal to either site. They had some internal issues on their end. They had a leasee who uses the land, number one. And in addition to that, because they were a public agency similar to the Coachella Valley Water District, they have specific requirements when they go to sell excess land outside of their coffer. So there was a time constraint with that, and they were non-committal on their ability to meet our schedule. However, like I said, when we received the request from Mr. Fish for the original 270, We did press hard with UCR. We engaged them regularly. We've had a few meetings with them to sell the value of the project. Like I said, the discussions with UCR fell silent over time, and we're just in a position where we need to get the project going. So we re-engaged with Mr. Fish, like I said, try to address his issue. I think we come up here with a win-win. For us hydraulically, this is the ideal location anyway for the project. To go through and relocate the pump station anywhere else creates a potential hydraulic issue, and we have a contractor that is moving as we speak.
And then one last point, as President Powell mentioned, there is a letter from your appraiser explaining everything that we just talked about in terms of the timing, the cost, and whether this is a reasonable settlement.
And then, do you feel that that you might still run into some issues? Is that why you're asking for that contingency, or what's the purpose of the contingency?
It's just a 5% contingency. We're really meant to address any issues that might come up through title or escrow.
But you're pretty firm on that one.
Yes, we are set. In fact, Mr. Fish has signed the agreement. We didn't have it signed before we published here for the board meeting, but he has signed the PSA.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. I just wanted to make sure I was fully understanding the story here, and I get it. So I'm ready to move forward.
Okay, thank you. And we do have a motion and a second on the item.
Yep.
Okay. So why don't we go to a roll call vote?
Sure. President Powell,
Aye.
Vice President Estrada,
Aye.
and Director Aguilar.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. That passed 3-0.
Thank you.
Back to reality. Thanks, David. Mm-hmm.
Director Nelson is on the line.
Is on the line? Okay, great. So we're back. 12A, board member general comments. Why don't we start with Director Bianco? No comments. Yeah, no comments from me either. Director Nelson?
Yeah, sure, John. Just a couple things. You mentioned how we have antiquated notifications for public announcements and public hearings and so forth. I just started laughing because I remember when we get our board packets by mail on Monday or Friday afternoon in this big packet of paper every 2 weeks, and it's we've come a long way since then. We still have a ways to go, it sounds like.
And just for
that's all my comments.
Those are all state legal requirements, so the state needs to update to the current.
Oh, yeah, they do. I still remember my doorbell ringing, and there's Tom Levy with my binder standing on my front porch on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah. Tom hardly delegated anything. But you had to micromanage the whole thing.
You guys are old.
Okay. Yeah, good comment.
Yeah, that's all I had.
So, Director Aguilar.
No comments, Mr. President.
And
Thank you.
Vice President Estrada, yeah.
I'll just say that I did attend I forget what they're calling it, but it was that fish derby tournament at the Lake Wea on the 17th, and it seems to be very well attended. There's a lot of veterans there, a lot of folks from the valley participating, fishing, and it seemed like a fun event. I thought it was great. That's
Was it Lake Wea?
Yes. Yep. Thank you. Did you catch anything?
No, I just kind of helped with giving the folks that caught something.
Okay.
I'm not Fisher.
Fair enough. Let's get into meetings then. The first one on April 13th, 2-on-2 with IID. And I know we had Estrada and myself, and Jim, along with Henry Martinez and Hamby, or their new, JB Hamby, their new director, and Jim Hanks were there. I mean, my take on it was nice to get together. It was nice to meet JB Hamby, but it doesn't seem like much has changed. And, you know, they're pretty spun up about the Maze legislation. But last time we asked him to stop because we thought we were going to make some progress, and we didn't make any progress. So it's kind of, I feel like we're just spinning our wheels, actually. I don't know about Director Estrada. You might have a different take on that.
Well, I think that we were pretty honest, at least from our side, as to what we thought we were trying to accomplish since the last time we got involved in perhaps conveying to the assembly member that this should be something that that should be resolved maybe at the local level. And so some efforts were made to try to do that. And as you mentioned, it didn't really produce much. So it seems like at least one of the ideas that came out of that meeting, and maybe it's because Director Hamby was not around when we gave it the first try, was doing something similar, where perhaps we could go back to the idea of an MOU being put together for purposes of trying to define what exactly it is that the Coachella Valley wants or needs, and what a plan moving forward would look like to try to accomplish whatever needs to be accomplished. And that's when we said, well, you know, that's what we tried to do 2 years ago, and we didn't get very far. So I think we were honest in our thoughts, and I was happy that we did that, so that we don't, you know, kind of dance around the issue. So that's what I took from it.
Yeah, I agree. Wonder if the ground rules for the meetings are still in effect. Is that a temporary? Remember we had like a little page about ground rules. We didn't even talk about that, but
Yeah, I think that kind of got.
that was a long time ago, right?
You guys are talking, and that is going in the right direction. There's some new board members down there, and as long as we continue to, you guys have these meetings, I think it's good, because nothing will get resolved without them. So at least you have a shot, a fighting shot to at least try.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, appreciate that. April 15th, USBR, Lower Colorado River webinar, Director Nelson.
Hey, John, I agree with Anthony on that. You know, the opportunity to talk, even if you just sit there and stare at each other, it's productive, right? To just continue that on. So my encouragement for your 2-on-2 there. April 15th, the Bureau had their 24-month study rollout webinar. April 15th is secondarily important to August, the August 24-month study, in that, you know, it's at the end of the water year, and it's giving some good direction as to where the water management is going based on lake levels, and doesn't look good. I mean, it's just really dry. We're looking at maybe the 4th lowest runoff in history on the Colorado River, so the with a couple years of exception, we're headed into continuing on with that 20-year drought since 2000. So it's not good. Predictions now are showing that we'd be not in the tier 0, but in the tier 1 shortages, which would call for additional Arizona and Nevada cuts or contributions to the DCP, and lake levels in Lake Powell would also indicate that we could be headed to, instead of an 8.23 release from Powell to Meade, that we'd be down at that next tier down to 7, I think it's 7.6. But that's going to be challenging as we go forward, so we'll see how that goes.
Thank you. April 20th, we had our cost of service special board meeting. Also, April 20th, discussion of MCL bill, Director Estrada.
Yeah, that's one of the bills that we've been tracking as part of the legislative committee. Obviously, a very important bill for us related to MCL compliance, something that we dealt with the Chromium-6, and that perhaps we're going to continue to deal with as the regulations come our way from the state, and very important that we have proper compliance periods so that we don't find ourselves out of compliance. And there were some concerns about the way the bill had been introduced, being a 2-year bill, and how the bill being a 2-year bill would not really address the Chromium-6 issue, because it sounds like the Chromium-6 issue is somehow going to come back before that. So if that bill's not in place, it fails to address Chromium-6. So really just kind of strategizing about how to address that. It is a bill that our Assembly Member Garcia introduced last minute, as I think some efforts were being made by Mr. Adan Ortega's group with the Community Water Systems Alliance, and I forget what other folks they represent, but it was kind of put in as a placeholder. I know that there was some conversation between the Assembly Member and the Chair of the Water Board, Chair Esquivel, there was some reasoning behind why it was going to be a 2-year bill versus a 1-year bill. So anyways, we had a conversation so that we could all be on the same page, our lobbyists, other folks that are working on it, the Assembly Member's office, and try to kind of bring up this issue about why the 2-year bill approach might be problematic. And I think where we landed is that we might still have an opportunity to address the Chromium issue as a 2-year bill, but only if we move it as a priority bill at the beginning of next year. And maybe that still puts us in a good place. So it was mainly just to try to recap and maybe think about next steps forward. But a lot of coordination with Katie, who's been very helpful and keeping us on task with all these things up in Sacramento and up in Washington.
Yeah. We had a April 21 study session on CIP and motor pool. April 22, Salt and Sea Authority, Directors Bianco and Estrada.
I did not. I did not attend the Salt and Sea Authority meeting.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
I was there. We approved the budget. We had a presentation by Frank Ruiz.
Mike, please.
The Audubon Beach Wetlands Project. We had an update on the North Lake Project, and then we had an update on federal, state, and local salt and sea efforts.
Good. We had looks like a 2-day workshop on Water 101, Director Aguilar. 2.5 days.
Thank you, President Powell. I had a last-minute conflict that developed, so I could not attend, but I understand the sessions were recorded, so I look forward to doing that when I can fit it into my schedule.
Okay, great. April 23rd, Riverside County Water Task Force, Director Estrada.
Yes, I attended somewhat of a workshop. They had three main speakers. They had somebody from MWD. I forget the name. I should know the name, but I forget it. And they presented on Colorado River supply and demand, a lot of their projections. They talked about Lake Mead. They talked about the elevation below 1075 on the model as of January 2021. They talked about how much storage they've accumulated. Sounds like they have a 1.6 to 1.7 million acre feet annual demand. And at one point they had about 13 times the amount of storage. So sounds like they filled a lot of storage. Let me see here. They talked a little bit about I guess some project that they're working on, and you folks that have been here more and more involved with that state water project, Colorado might be able to pencil this more than I can. But they have something called WSDM, which I don't even know what the acronym's for, but it's for dry years. And it looks like it's some operational thing they could do to move water between the state water project and the Colorado aqueduct using Lakeview. So then in the summary that they basically just said the limited state emergency declared, the state water project obviously has that 5% allocation, shortage declaration projected for 2022 on Colorado, which was news to me, and kind of their efforts to try to manage those supplies between the Colorado and the state water project. Then there was a presentation by Senator Anthony Portantino. He represents the 25th District. He's working on SB 45, the water bond for 2022. Really focused on climate change, capacity issues. I did ask a question during his presentation, and my question was related to perhaps whether there was capacity issues in the actual in the delivery system. So, and the reason I thought about that question was because after hearing that Metropolitan Water District and perhaps other folks have created enough storage or can create storage to try to use that supply during dry years, whether that solves the problem, because it sounded to me like, this has been my perception by being at this board, is that a lot of times we don't have the ability to move water around California, although there might be storage. So that was my question. The folks from Metropolitan Water District were able to kind of focus on three different areas, what they considered bottlenecks. And they talked about moving water across the Delta, to the Delta conveyance, the issues with ag demand in the Central Valley during the summers and subsidence, and that creates a bottleneck, et cetera, et cetera. So it was very interesting. And then after that, there was a presentation on by our Assembly Member Eduardo Garcia, and he focused a lot on the MCL bill that we just covered, some of the projects related to consolidations, the bond bills that he's carrying. So overall, it was very comprehensive, and I got to learn a lot.
Great. Yesterday, California Farm Water Coalition, Director Nelson. Not hearing. Oh, yeah, you might be muted, Peter.
I'm sorry. It happens at least once a meeting, and glad it happened to me. So anyway, it was our bi-monthly meeting. We had a good discussion about strategic development, who we should engage on that. And we actually did approve a contract, a very pared down contract with Rouch Communications to help us out with that, and talk to some key members of our California Farm Water Coalition community in terms of direction for the future. So that was good. We also had some good discussion about two pieces that were put out. And I think they came through. I think most of you received the California Farm Water Coalition newsletter talking about the cuts that have already taken place in agriculture across the state. So there was that one. And then the other one was how this year's snowpack and drought compared to 2015, which is pretty interesting that we're headed into this year at lower reservoir levels than we were in 2015, which is a little bit scary considering the fact that we have this 5% allocation and so forth. So good meeting, and there's my report.
Thank you. Are there any other meetings we need to add for reporting?
Mr. President, on the 23rd, I attended the Colorado River hydrology assessment, which is a follow-up meeting to the Bureau of Reclamation's reporting in conjunction with the Secure Water Act. I think it was in 2016, and this is the 2021 version. The Bureau is required to report on climate change assessments in basins across the country, and the Colorado River is one of them. It was not as detailed as I thought it would be, which is kind of interesting. I think it was probably less detailed than the 24-month study. So it was looked to me like it did focus more on climate change, I will admit, and that the outlook's not good there either. Hotter, drier. There's the report.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, Mr. President, I had a meeting on the 22nd. That was the same day as the Salton Sea Authority meeting. I had 3 conflicting meetings that day. The Salton Sea Authority meeting, the SAFER Advisory Group meeting with the state related to SB 200, which I did attend for about 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and then had to jump off because there was an Oasis tour scheduled on Avenue 70 with the BIA, the EPA, the county's various departments, the supervisor's office, and we were in attendance as well. So we met there in the morning, walked the site, and kind of talked about the different things that are happening. We were able to share with them progress in the project that we've been helping with along Avenue 70. We did explain to the BIA that we seem to really need their help in securing easements. And so that's all been kind of, I think there's been a lot of coordination between our staff and BIA staff. And it sounds like BIA is more than willing to help us move that paperwork and secure those easements and that access sooner than later. So very positive news on their end. They seem to want to be very helpful. They're interested in finding solutions here. We talked about the water tender that we have out there. And I did forget that there was also members, representatives of the congressman's office, so we were able to chat about the earmark request that we submitted for. And so overall, it was great that we all connected, and it seems that for the most part, everybody wants to collaborate to find some sort of resolution for this issue. And I did forget again to not just the congressman's office, but we did have Vice Chair Joseph Mireles, who was also there representing the Torres Martinez tribe. So I think the right people were there, and we were able to, meet face to face and create some good relationships, I think, in an effort to get this project done, whether it's Avenue 66, whether it's Avenue 70, or any other project. I think folks understand that there's a need there, and we got to take care of it. So it was very important for us to be there.
All right, thank you. And if there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to approve per diem for the meetings we put on.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second it. And the roll call, please.
President Powell,
Aye.
Vice President Estrada,
Aye.
Director Bianco,
Aye.
Director Aguilar,
Yes.
Director Nelson.
Aye.
Okay, that passed 5-0. And General Manager report.
Yes, sir. As far as our COVID statistics go, we've had 89 recovered positive cases. We have 0 current positive cases, 0 direct contacts, 0 indirect contacts, 0 folks off work right now because of COVID. For the month of April, we've had 1 case, and then unfortunately, we have had 2 mortalities. Looking back at the vaccination survey that we did, the last survey we did was just on the 13th of April, and it looked like we had about 170 folks. We had about 43 employees through the clinic we had here. So add them up, we've got maybe about 30% of the staff that's currently vaccinated. We do have folks, about 24 of the 179 surveyed said no, they had no intention of getting vaccinated. So it's a relatively small number, but because we only had 179 responses to the survey, if you weren't planning to get vaccinated, you probably didn't respond to the survey. So that number may actually be higher. I don't know, we'll see. A lot of folks indicated they prefer the one-shot Johnson & Johnson. So I don't know where they stand with that now. The only other comment I do want to make is that with Director Nelson's headset, the sound seems to be much better. Director Estrada seemed to sound fine, but Mr. Strasberg, not so good. So I don't know, I would have to assume it's not our system of receiving and then rebroadcasting in here. I think it's more a function of the microphone that folks are actually using, or how close they are to the microphone. And I realize we have the same problem here, whether we get closer to the microphone or we get further away from the microphone. That's all I got, sir.
Excellent demonstration. Council report.
And I will pass today, Mr. President.
Do we have any departmental reports?
As far as departmental reports, sir, I was out of the office Thursday, Friday, and Monday. I didn't get anything that anybody wanted to speak, so just one last call. No reports, sir.
Oh, that's great then. And we do not have a closed session.
We do not
on the
have a
agenda
closed session,
today.
sir. Nope.
So that
great.
concludes our business for today, and hearing no objection, we are adjourned.
10:30. 10:32.
Not too bad.